Good afternoon or good morning, everybody, depending on where you are joining us from. Just giving it a moment until participants are joining from the waiting room. In the meantime, let me just quickly introduce myself. My name is Zsuzsanna Bég. I'm a program officer at the German Marshall Fund of the United States, based in Berlin. And I'm very glad to welcome you today for this discussion that takes place in the framework of our AUTHLIB Neo-authoritarianisms in Europe and the liberal democratic response. This project is supported by the European Commission under the Horizon framework. It is led by the Central European University and its Democracy Institute based in Vienna and Budapest, and set out to explore a variety of challenges to liberal democracy across Europe, in and out of the European Union, but focusing on a set of countries: Italy, France, Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Austria, as well as the United Kingdom. It does not only seek to explore what challenges liberal democracies face today, but it also tries to identify potential ways to protect and reinforce the resilience of democracies across the continent. Today, we have the pleasure to share with you some of the findings of this project, which encompasses a host of work packages. Today, we are going to focus on our fresh results that went into detail on the transnationalization of the illiberal scene, looking at how illiberal actors are building their networks, how it impacts politics and policies, and whether or not we actually see a rise of internationalization, transnationalization of actors which are very often actually regarded nationalist and harbor nationalist sentiments. Very often in the news, we hear about the cooperation of illiberal parties across Europe. That is not what we are going to focus primarily on today. Instead, we thought we would share with you our fresh insights into how non-party actors, social movements, think tanks, very often supporting parties, have developed their networks across Europe in response to specific policy areas like immigration, but also gathering around issues like the anti-gender movements do across Europe. We also try to see how such networks actually support the interconnectedness of illiberal parties and what impact they may have on policies and politics in the European Union. We will explore mechanisms, level of transnationalization, as well as what are the narratives that really spread across Europe. To support this endeavor, we have today with you two researchers from the Scuola Normale Superiore, one of our consortium partners in the AUTHLIB project, Batuhan Eren and Ivan Trampic, who have very closely worked on these topics and will share with you their insights. And we are also joined by the head of our consortium, Professor Zsolt Enyedi, who is teaching political science at the Central European University, who will also help us to dig deeper and discuss the ideas presented today. Before we dive in, I would just share with you a few housekeeping rules. So please be aware that the event is public and is recorded, and we will be sharing it on our YouTube channel. So in case you can stay until the end, you'll be able to catch up later, but I would like to encourage you to stay until the end. It's going to be well worth it. And we will, of course, not just present you findings, but would be very happy to hear from you and take your questions, comments. So I would like to encourage you to share those in the chat function and also in the Q&A. We will be picking up those, making sure that they are addressed in the panel and also recorded. So please do not expect responses in writing. We will be discussing them in the panel. So without further ado, I think we, in the meantime, have the critical mass in the audience as well. I would like to pass the floor to Ivan to set the scene and share these fresh insights with us.
Thank you, Zsuzsanna. I'm just going to share my presentation. Okay, thanks for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here and share the early, still early, but very interesting, I think, results of the analysis we did at Scuola Normale Superiore. As Zsuzsanna mentioned, we are focusing on the transnationalization of the illiberal right. So before we start, of course, we have to define what our approach to illiberal transnationalization is. And here we wanted to capture actions and interactions of various actors belonging to, let's say, a field of illiberal politics, conceptualized in two ways. First, as the transnationalization of framing, of organizations, and of actions. And secondly, as diffusion. And diffusion is a more direct form of exchange of various frames or practices or even organizational forms between what is usually called transmitters and adopters. So what we are doing in an analytical and theoretical sense is building on the growing but still small field on the transnationalization of radical right, illiberal, and regressive actors. Here, of course, I have to point out that these are different concepts that grasp different phenomena and different actors. But we wanted to take a broader inclusive approach, which increases the heterogeneity, as Zsuzsanna mentioned, to focus on the not so usual suspects. So still we can say that there is a large overlap in the ideology and framing of these actors. So finally, we are applying social movement theories to transnational interactions in a dynamic and agent-based approach, which basically means that we are looking at what the actors themselves are doing and how they are doing it and who is doing what in Europe and on a transnational level. Okay, so the first question then is, which actors did we actually analyze? As I mentioned, we have a kind of broad understanding of radical right politics, which is defined around the main organizational forms and issue foci, which is a very weird word that I had to check how to pronounce. But these include various actors. So it includes radical right parties and movement actors, such as the populist radical right parties, usual suspects in terms of very strong authoritarian nativist anti-immigrant focus, but also, as Zsuzsanna mentioned, anti-gender actors, which are oftentimes Christian-inspired organizations, advocacy groups, NGOs, citizens' initiatives, and especially lobbies on a transnational level. The third group, which was not that prominent in the end in our sample, which we can discuss maybe later, are the anti-vaccine and conspiracist actors, which of course do not always have to be radical right or even right-wing, but are included as illiberal actors here. And the actors that we have in the sample indeed do belong to the illiberal right. So the first analysis we conducted was the social network analysis with two research questions in mind. First, do illiberal actors constitute a network in spreading illiberal content on social media? And second, which actors are central in the diffusion of illiberal content across national borders? So here we covered a broad time frame between 2008 and 2022, which includes three main events or let's say critical events or crises, the economic crisis, the refugee crisis, and the pandemic. Our colleague Jakub Stauber conducted an analysis of 255 Twitter accounts and generated a database of mutual connections between the actors based on the mentions on Twitter or today X. We then generated 7 lists of 100 to 150 actors per each of the country cases, as Zsuzsanna already mentioned. I will go through them once again. So Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Austria, France, Italy, and the United Kingdom. So what we have done so far, we conducted a descriptive statistics. We generated some graphical outputs of the network analysis. You will see a scatter plot that demonstrates the domestic and international mentions, and also the early interpretation. The early interpretation of the networks is based on 3 social network measures: a degree centrality, betweenness centrality, and eigenvector centrality. And these measures basically show us who is interacting the most with on a transnational level, who has most links with others. Second, who acts more often as a bridge between different actors. And third, who is the most influential, meaning who connects with actors that are themselves connected to a lot of other actors. So what we can see here on the left-hand side is the visualization of the transnational network. Let me just move my zoom bar over on the right side. Okay, so what we can see here is that France and Hungary are here green and Hungary blue, are central hubs of the radical right network, meaning that actors from these countries play significant roles in connecting the various illiberal movements and parties across Europe. Italy and the United Kingdom, here in purple and turquoise, are also contributing to the international connections, especially through repeated interactions with French and Hungarian actors. Finally, what we also see is that Austria and the Czech Republic appear as more isolated within this network, suggesting that their radical right actors may be less involved. But this could also be due to some methodological limitations. And also, of course, this does not include FPO, which is, of course, highly connected on an international and transnational level. And this we can also see on the right-hand side. Here we have basically the Twitter accounts. And before I comment, before I move on with the interpretation and the comments, what I would like to mention is that what is interesting is that political movements, various cultural, traditionalist, and anti-gender groups are very well connected transnationally and play pivotal roles. Most often we are hypothesizing right now as brokers, whereas the political parties are playing more of a leadership role. So they are providing legitimacy to other actors, to actors in other countries, as well as resources when networking. So yeah, what is maybe most obvious here, you can see in the top right corner is Marine Le Pen's Twitter, which is both nationally very prominent and internationally. which of course makes sense because the National Rally is a kind of prototypical radical right party that has long served as a role model and an example for other European parties and movements. But then we also have others like Ordo Iuris, Militia Christi. So the movement actors that I will mention later that are maybe not as frequently analyzed. The second analysis we conducted was an event chronology. So here we wanted to zoom in a bit more. So what we did was we focused on illiberal transnational practices as events coded from Facebook posts. Might sound a bit confusing, but we will get to it later. So what did we want to do? We wanted to monitor and document on a daily basis on Facebook any form of interaction and cooperation of selected radical right actors from the 7 countries. So again, as in the SNA, this also included movement actors, think tanks, media organizations, etc. And we are here building on the social movement research on protest event analysis that is kind of expanding the idea of what an event is. We wanted to capture more in-depth the processes and interactions within a brief time period, not a longer period as it was the case in the social network analysis. And this period was around the European Parliament elections between January and September of this year. In a theoretical sense, we were particularly inspired by Fangen and Weiskircher's conceptualization of events, which is quite broad and flexible and useful in this sense, and includes individual instances of contact, but also sustained forms of cooperation. What this basically means is that if one actor goes as a guest speaker to another country, to another radical right event, this was counted, but also larger international networking events naturally were counted, online endorsements or praise of other illiberal actors. So this is all belonging in our definition of an event. And here, the very early, I would still say, results. What we can see here from the event chronology is the number of transnational radical right events over time. And I think maybe the first reaction for me is that there is an overall very low number of events which suggests that nationalists do, in fact, primarily communicate to a national audience. But this is not necessarily the case, because also with left-wing actors, of course, the focus is usually national politics, because, of course, European elections are often regarded as second-order elections. However, we have 143 events from 29 different actors in the 6-month period. What is interesting is that despite the EU elections, which were held in early June, there is actually a surprising slump before the election. Although the actors were themselves commenting frequently the EU elections, they were criticizing EU's leadership and policies. This transnational interest, we could call it, did not translate into higher international interactions. And then, of course, we have the spike in the graph, which is visible around July. So this is a result of 2 things. First of all, the result of a kind of post-electoral, we can say, frenzy, where political parties were realigning themselves to different European political groups. As you know, Patriots for Europe were created, different actors were switching or leaving groups, which resulted in part in this increase of transnational events. On the other hand, it is also the result of an outlier, which is one actor in particular, the Center for Fundamental Rights, and the CPAC event, which I will talk about more later, but it is important to mention now. On the right side, we can see what these events actually are in a more substantial sense. So we have transnational meetings, which includes bilateral or trilateral meetings between leaders or party members, as well as international events. We have expressions of support, which can be and usually are online praise of other actors or support. Electoral engagement and alliance building, which is a more formalized category. So it includes, for example, the creation of new political groups or NGOs on a transnational level. What is interesting here is that despite how costly in terms of resources it is, there is actually a very high level of transnational in-person meetings between illiberal actors. But of course, we have to remind that there is an overall low number of events, 143 events in 7 countries in the 6 months. One more graph just to show you again, not to take up too much time. I think this is interesting. Here we can see precisely the importance of individual actors, the Center for Fundamental Rights and Ordo Iuris, the think tanks, along with the quote-unquote usual suspects, which are FPO and Fidesz. So these are established radical right parties that also are a role model for other actors. Okay, so what can we say? How can we interpret these findings and analyses? So some of our early thoughts are basically what we are seeing is that foundations, advocacy groups, and think tanks have been playing an increasingly important role in illiberal transnationalization. As Abrahamson and Williams put it, through new universities, think tanks, and publications, the radical right's aim is to replace the liberal, woke, managerial, globalist elite with a right-wing elite. And here, again, we have 2 prominent examples. First is Ordo Iuris, an organization from Poland infamous for promoting and lobbying for a ban on abortion and divorce. Ordo Iuris appears as the think tank with the 2nd highest number of transnational events. Ordo Iuris holds meetings with its offshoots in other countries, for example, in Croatia during the time period we were analyzing, or illiberal knowledge producers such as the Matthias Corvinus Collegium in Hungary. Ordo Iuris also connects with high-profile American illiberal actors such as the Heritage Foundation and advisors of the Republican Party. The second example is the Center for Fundamental Rights, which is basically the most important organization in our event chronology. And this is because of the fact that it organizes the Conservative Political Action Conference, whose main goal and probably only goal is transnationalization or active seeking of strategic political partnerships on the global scale. Okay, not to bombard you with too much text, this is my final slide here. What I want to point out is, again, the Center for Fundamental Rights engaged in transnational coalition building and actually boasts that it helped create the new group of Patriots for Europe. Quote, "Our center is proud to have been a catalyst for international cooperation of national forces." On the other hand, Ordo Iuris, which I also mentioned, we have the instances of organizational diffusion, creation of the same basically or similar organizations in other countries such as Croatia. Quote, "For several years, the Ordo Iuris Institute has also been operating in Croatia, where conservative communities also struggle with a massive offensive of leftist movements, forcing what they call pro-abortion ideology, gender, and LGBT," end quote. So to just briefly summarize, again, I wanted to highlight the role of non-partisan actors. However, again, we found that political parties are very important. And here I will give the floor to my colleague, Batuhan Eren.
Thank you so much, Ivan, for the introduction and presentation so far, and thank you all for being here, for participating in this beautiful event. And as Ivan mentioned, that I would like to also focus a bit more on the role of parties, because as we have seen on our tables, also as we have seen in the relevant literature, the political parties play a very important role in the transnationalization process, with their resources, with their capacities to interact with other actors, and with their audience to be mobilized, actually. And our research actually shows that many illiberal parties actually invest in these transnationalization processes, and they want to strengthen their transnational influence. So to discuss this issue, I thought that it would be better to actually focus on two actors that are somehow constructing due to their electoral results, but also they follow a similar pathways of transnationalization, which are FPÖ in Austria, a major political party, and Reconquête in France, which is a relatively minor political party in France. And let's start with the FPÖ, because FPÖ, as you have also seen in our presentation, in our tables, is the most important political party in terms of transnationalization activities. FPÖ was involved in nearly all of the activity types that we are analyzing. This is a very, I think, important finding in our research. Both party and its leader, Herbert Kickl, was very active in expressing support to not only the political party leaders, but also other type of actors, like the protesting farmers in Belgium, or any type of political movements in other countries as well. Apart from these expression of support, the party was also actively engaging in the organization and participation of the transnational events, international meetings, such as the CPAC, or Conservative Political Action Conference, in Hungary this year, and also previous years, if I'm not wrong. It's also involved in the transnational alliance building processes, just like the formation of Patriots for Europe in European Parliament, with other parties like Fidesz in Hungary and ANO in Czech Republic. The party also furthermore supported the local and national the candidates in the elections by the illiberal actors in other countries like Le Pen or the other illiberal parties in French elections this summer. So this demonstrates that FPÖ is actually engaged in all type of activities, and its support is not only limited to the political parties, but it actually interacts with the broad universe of the actors in these illiberal politics. And we can observe a smaller but a less intense but a similar pathway for the Reconquête as well, because its members and former members, such as Mario Maréchal, for example, organized meetings with the politicians like Giorgia Meloni in Italy. They explicitly supported them. They participated in transnational events just like the FPÖ, and actually party's youth branch, Generation Z, was actively involving in these different type of activities, and they were actually always supporting the political groups like European Conservatives and Reformists or other type of transnational organizations. So these two cases, these two parties specifically, clearly demonstrate that political parties, yes, are active and they're important actors of the transnationalization. And it's important to see that their activities are diverse. It's not limited to the networking interactions with political parties, but both parties and many others actually actively involved in the activities, different type of activities with different type of actors that are beyond the party politics. And I think these demonstrate a significant pattern, a significant dynamic in the transnationalization of illiberalism, because it's actually a universe that contains a complex interactions among different type of actors by participating in different types of events. So I think, I mean, there's of course different things that can be observed in this research, but I think one of the important outputs would be to acknowledge the different types of activities that these transnationalization processes includes. It's not only about, you know, saluting each other or expressing support, but it covers a very broad range of activities that were carried out by many actors, which lead to their cooperation and interaction, and consequently the strengthening of their transnational influence. And I think that in this event chronology part, we can see these action and actor-based understanding. And at that moment, I would like to move to the ideational dimension of this transnationalization. So I think that it's a good time to change the slides for exciting screen time. Okay. And here we are. Okay, so to understand the ideational dimension, which actually is about the ideas and the frames that were used by illiberal actors, our collaborators led by Nicola Penucci conducted a dictionary-based content analysis of illiberalism. And the main objective here is to explore the presence and the commonalities in the frames that were used by the political actors of this illiberal universe in their social media accounts, to understand actually based on which ideas that transnationalization process happened. And frames are they're very popular in social movement studies and also communication studies, and they can be considered as the interpretive schema that shape our understanding of the world. They are like mental glasses that we have that shape that decide how we are going to see the social reality. And actually, it's a very, very pragmatic tool for the political actors, for the social actors, to guide their audiences to preferred conclusions. Very basic and very classical example, gender ideology frame is a very common one used by some of the illiberal actors, or invasion frame is a very, very common one to discuss the immigration-related issues by, again, the illiberal actors. So just to give you an idea about what a frame is in general. And in this part of the research, actually, our team focused on, so what are the most common ideas? What are the most common frames that were used by these illiberal actors? And if we can see similarities and differences when they're talking about similar policy fields, like, as I will demonstrate to you, like the immigration, like citizenship, like gender, like education, etc. So to do this research, actually, again, we have our 7 countries, and again, we have our political actors that are beyond the party politics, that includes also political movements, the civil society organizations, etc. And here we focus on 5 major policy fields and actually see which frames are used in these fields, which are immigration and citizenship, gender, education and culture, environment and climate change, and social policy. And similarly, we cover again the Facebook data, which is very rich to actually track that kind of ideational components of transnationalization. And our time frame is from 2008, which is the foundation of Facebook, to 2023. But I must say that this doesn't mean that all actors have these, 15 years of Facebook pages. It's a very limited data because, some of them are their pages are new, or some of them were closed. So actually our actor size this time, the sample group was smaller compared to previous research. So here we focused on 138 Facebook pages from as the official accounts of the illiberal actors, and we analyzed more than 70,000 posts. And the data collection was conducted by our team members through the CrowdTangle, that is a kind of official application of Meta platform to enable you to, officially and legally collect data from the pages. And then we use a dictionary that is constructed by the other collaborators of the AUTHLIB team to see actually if we can see any patterns in the frames that were used by the illiberal actors in their research, in their social media activities. And here, just a very basic understanding, a glimpse of how our dictionary was looking. So here you can see some general terms. This is about actually the environmental issues, like the national environment term, a frame. And then we have the country-specific frames, like the hunting session for the Austria, which is a kind of relevant thing that makes sense contextually. And then we check actually if we can observe the frames, these kind of frames from this dictionary in the Facebook post of the actors. And on the right side, you can see a general table about findings. But I think the more important and interesting part to actually delve a bit more into what we have at the end of the day in this analysis. And of course, we have some usual suspects, as also Ivan mentioned, the usual consequences that we can see. And here we can see some of the top issues and least issues that were discussed by these actors. And top 2 issues was, unsurprisingly, are the immigration and gender-related topics. And considering the previous research on this issue and the whole literature on illiberalism, it is very predictable to see this consequence, I think. But the interesting part is when you look at the countries one by one, then we can see there's some diversion distinction between them. And for example, in Italy, in the UK, in the France, migration is the top country that is discussed, or that is framed by these illiberal actors. And considering the parties like Fratelli d'Italia or Le Pen's party or Reconquête in France or the radical right groups in the UK, it is not very surprising to see the increasing and growing trend of discussions about the immigration issues. And when we look at the cases of Poland, Hungary, and Austria, actually it's the gender that is much more popular compared to other issues. And again, when we consider about the anti-gender movement's roots in these countries, the impact of Catholic Church and other kind of important institutions and activities like Ordo Iuris, as Ivan discussed, it is also not very surprising to see why gender is very important in these issues, in these countries. And actually, the least discussed issues are the education and culture and environment and change in all countries, which is, again, not very surprising. Although there are some actors that discuss about these issues, they're not very popular, and they're not in the radar of illiberal actors and on their social media accounts. And lastly, a kind of interesting finding that we observe is the emphasis on social policy related frames, especially in the UK, in the Italy, and in France. Well, considering the social democracy background of these countries, it makes sense to actually see that, but it was still a bit interesting to find actually, especially in the UK, how social policy related frames, which are about employment, the public work, the social assistances, play an important role actually, or are very visible in the frames that were used by the illiberal actors. So especially for the future research, I think this shows an important glimpse that can be further investigated to see how and why social policy is still a very important discussion field in the public sphere by the illiberal actors. And let's go a bit deep also in the analysis to see what are the major issues discussed by using these frames. Well, in the gender issue, we have very common and very, I think, predictable frames like family, like gender, like marriage that were very common in all countries. But also one of the important findings that we observe is that we found is the popularity of transgender-related issues, popularity of transgender visibility, transgender rights-related frames that were used by the illiberal actors. As you can see in this table, for example, in all countries, we observe trans as one of the top 3 frames that were used. And we believe that this tells something about this growing emphasis, growing focus on the transgender rights and transgender visibility as a contentious issue that the illiberal actors are also increasingly engaging in their public discussions. So this can be a good, a kind of good finding to further elaborate by the future research. And regarding the immigration and citizenship, again, we have some interesting findings because what we observe is that, especially in France, in Austria, and in Hungary, the immigration-related frames are mostly about the immigration and the cultural and religious identity. So here, the immigration was mostly covered as a kind of threat to the local and national identities, with the popularity of frames such as Islam, such as veil, such as headscarf, and such as invasion, actually. And in the cases like the UK, Poland, and Czech Republic, actually the national security and sovereignty related discussions are more popular by using the frames about the immigration. So the cases, the frames like sovereignty, like the terrorism, the Muslim, the violence are more popular, more used actually in these countries when the illiberal actors were discussing the immigration-related issues. But in general, actually, in all countries, we observe many frames that are kind of correlated and related with the criminality and the social impact of immigration in general. And regarding the less popular issues, less popular policy fields, well, especially in education and culture, we observe that I personally believe very interesting and a finding that I found very interesting is the growing emphasis on the wokeism and anti-wokeism, especially in countries Hungary and France. These anti-woke stance, especially in the frames of the illiberal actors, are very visible. And considering Orban's very active anti-stance position and considering KPAC event as an anti-woke or a kind of woke-free zone, framing it in that way, and also considering the growing intellectual debate about anti-wokeism, framing it as a kind of a US imported idea, it's kind of understandable to see these growing trends in our findings as well. So we believe that actually it should be further investigated in the future research again. And regarding the environment and climate change, actually energy independence from the supranational companies, supranational institutions, and some other countries like Russia or the US is one of the patterns that we observe. And lastly, of course, the climate skepticism and climate hysteria were popular frames when the illiberal actors were discussing these issues. And about social policy, the most common ones were actually about the work rights and the meritocracy. Also the public work and unemployment issues, and actually the social assistances are also again significant issues that were discussed by the illiberal actors when they're talking about the social policy related issues. So in conclusion, we hope to actually provide a kind of framework to explore the similar ideas that were used by illiberal actors, and we believe that analyzing the frames are significant to actually understand how the actors mobilize and guide their growing audiences, nationally, but also transnationally. So the findings help us to understand based on which ideas the transnationalization of networks are built in this complex and interactive reality. As we do not only focus on political parties, but also political movements, we believe that our findings can capture this complex reality consisting of many types of actors in this universe, as we have discussed throughout this research and throughout this presentation. And the findings have already been helpful to confirm some of the previous findings in other research, just like the significant interconnectedness of the gender and immigration-related actors, and the popular use of the frames related to gender and immigration issues. And apart from these usual suspects, the findings can also provide us with some glimpse of where to look for the future research, like the increasing emphasis on wokeism or the transgender rights or the social policy related debates in certain countries. So finally, in this research, we hope to present a kind of complex reality of transnationalization, of illiberalism, and help researchers by exploring its different dynamics and pathways. So this is still a work in progress research, but we hope that you liked it, and we would love to actually hear your feedbacks and suggestions to further help us to improve it. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Batuhan and Ivan, for sharing these insights. Really fascinating, I think. I already have a few questions to you, but I will refrain from posing them right now and would first pass the floor to Joët for some initial comments and to kick off our discussion. And I would, in the meantime, like to encourage our audience to share your views and questions in the Q&A box as well. We will be picking up your questions later.
So thanks a lot for the opportunity to be the first to comment on these fascinating results. It's really a pioneering study that produced some exciting findings. I think in general, your results underline that we need to go beyond simply conceptualizing the challenges to liberal democracy as something posed by political entrepreneurs who simply exploit discontent. But there is behind those party leaders who come to mind always, there is a layer of organizations, think tanks, various social movement like organizations, NGOs, and so on, that produce ideas, produce a discourse, and that has serious consequences. there is also a lot to be said, as I understand, about the interplay between parties and this organization. So it seems really very complex cooperation that is happening between them. I liked also your initial design to focus particularly on nationalist, anti-gender, and anti-vaccine movements, because that shows the colorfulness of this illiberal world. So on the one hand, you have nationalists who are kind of the classical examples of illiberals going back to the 19th century. And of course, they have a lot to do with the current day subjects such as immigration as well, but they have a great deal of continuity. And then you have anti-gender, which is in a way a new thing, couple of decades old, and it's very much related to culture wars, while at the same time it stands for traditionalism. It politicizes the orientation of traditionalism. And then you have anti-vaccine, which is really interesting innovation in the sense that it has strong libertarian elements. And in many of these countries that we study, libertarianism hasn't been traditionally part of the radical right. So to some extent, this is an innovation, and we are still following how it plays out. I found very interesting the discussion of the specific organizations. I think there are some characteristics of this organization that probably cannot be detected by simply looking at their activity. We would need to go a bit beyond that and to see where they have the money from and who makes the decisions. For example, I believe that heritage and Ordo Iuris are ideologically defined civil society organizations that do receive a lot of support from political actors, and in case of Ordo Iuris, it received from the government, Polish government, the peace government. But they are autonomous actors who try to influence governing. While the Center for Fundamental Rights in Hungary pretends to be a similar kind of animal, but in fact, it's actually a part of the state administration. It's that arm of the Fidesz government that is responsible for some of the international cooperation. Coming to Hungary, I think one of your conclusions should be that size doesn't seem to matter that much. This is what I got also when I looked at the parties. So Reconquête seems to be a very important party, even though it's very small. And Hungary seems to be a very important player in spite of its size. And that reminds us that indeed the network perspective that you use is extremely fruitful perspective, analytically speaking, because it reminds us of the fact that you can play an important role by connecting different actors and organizing, being a mediator, putting the common dictionary, common vocabulary into these projects, even though you don't necessarily have, in terms of classical measures, a very big importance. I also would like to remind ourselves concerning the financing aspect of these corporations that we know, maybe not from statistics, but from various partly anecdotal evidence, that a lot of money is coming from United States and Russia in Europe. And the Christian right used to play a very big role in channeling this money, and probably this is still happening. There is a bit of a problem now because the Russians were very active on this scene, and because of the war, they cannot be as active as in the past. But these structures of cooperation, very much related to the anti-gender, family, traditional family-based networks, continues to be important. Also, it's good to mention that the European Union plays a rather controversial role in all this, because on the one hand, clearly these actors react negatively to European integration. On the other hand, as you also mentioned in your report, some of this cooperation happens based on EU money. The European Parliament finances many of these activities. And of course, Brussels is a place where these actors meet. And it's really fascinating that actors who are otherwise interested in somewhat different issues and are geographically far away from each other, how they come together. The recent scandal in Brussels when the Rassemblement National's president's book, Bardella's books, was presented, happened in the so-called Hungarian house that was nominally established to help the Hungarian presidency of the EU, but is basically used to create this radical right European international, and uses public money to do so. I also found very interesting your report on the frames and on the topics these actors focus on. I see that, as you argue, immigration and gender are the two big common denominators. Interestingly, the topics that receive less attention, such as social policy, environment, and education, still have frames behind that are ideologically very well interpretable. So then one wonders, how come that there are these topics for which these actors have an answer, but for some reason they don't talk about that answer so much, but it's there. They use it when they have to, when they get close to government, but they don't put it in the front. Probably it's simply the effect of what the public is interested in, but maybe there is also some attempt here to direct attention away from some of the programs and plans they have. And then I was really impressed by this extremely important role of the trans issue. I mean, according to any rational calculus, it shouldn't be among the first three most important issues. In general, this anti-woke discourse in Eastern European countries where there is no woke, so that there is nothing to react to in local sense, still allows for this great prominence of this topic, which I think shows the globalization, the power of globalization, that we have a very well integrated public discourse across the world, and it doesn't matter which corner of the world you are, or at least which corner of the I don't know, advanced capitalist countries you are. As far as we understand, in the American election, one of the most effective advertisement was a trans-related advertisement. So this really works. It works whether you are in Kansas or in Poland. Everywhere works. So I just want to say that I think it's great that you use this network perspective. It's great that you look both at the relations among actors and at the frames they use. And it is extremely useful that you remind us that this meta politics, that is not the actual electoral politics, but the politics aimed to capture public discourse, is a very important layer of this phenomenon. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Roth. You raised a lot of very interesting additional points, and I'm particularly happy that you brought up the issue of relationship between the sort of think tanks or civic organizations and the parties that Ivan and Batuhan were discussing, and I think it would be particularly interesting to explore that further. And if you feel like it, guys, feel free to also jump in on this later on. But you mentioned that think tanks, such organization, non-party organizations are kind of like brokers in building these networks. And then following from that, a question I would have towards this is, are they brokers who, as Joad also raised it, just follow their own agenda and build the interconnectedness? Or to what extent do we actually see also an instrumentalization of such organizations appearing to be independent of parties, and to what extent this may be a practice appearing in the political scene as we observe the internationalization and transnationalization, as well as the diffusion of the practices. Before moving into the Q&A, I would give back the floor to Ivan and Batuhan and suggest that you react very briefly in a few minutes to what has been said. And we have already a few questions in the Q&A box, which then I will bring in as we continue the discussion. Our audience is, of course, encouraged to share further comments and questions with us.
Thank you very much for the very insightful comments that actually are very good food for thought and help elaborate the substantial issues behind what is a lot of charts and numbers, especially what both of you mentioned, which is the fact that the two actors that I highlighted, Ordo Iuris and Center for Fundamental Rights, come from countries which had or have illiberal governments, and this is definitely not coincidence. So in this sense, the answer to Zsuzsanna would be that yes, to what extent they follow their agenda. On one hand, there is, I think, here a difference. In the case of CPAC and Hungary, I think, as Zsolt said, this is more or less of an extended arm of the illiberal regime that specializes in international political strategizing and networking. Ordo Iuris, however, is a different animal, so to speak, because in Poland there is this long history of cooperation, but also conflict between a proper Catholic ultra-conservative movement and its lobbies, and the populist radical rights, including PiS, but also other parties. So here the situation is, I would say these actors are more autonomous. And I also think this is in general the case when it comes to anti-gender organizations, which are linked to a more specific culture, history of Christian right mobilizing. Regarding the links between political movements and parties, here, yes, there is definitely a lot to be said. I think that what we also see here is very, at least in the event chronology, is kind of biased by the EU elections. So the fact that we chose the period of EU elections highlights, of course, political parties. So there is also additional work to be done in the future in this sense. Just one more point before I hand over to Batuhan. I think what is crucial to emphasize is, despite all of the cooperation we are mentioning, what we can actually see is very high conflict, disagreement, inability to cooperate. And something that we didn't have time to develop for today yet, but which will be very interesting, are also the issues in the event chronology, where you see how the wars in Ukraine and in Gaza are very important issues of conflict, basically, between Patriots for Europe, ESN, ECR, so the different right of center and far right political groups. And of course, these are well-known, I don't know how to call it, issues of contention between various actors.
Thank you so much for the questions and the comments, and thank you, Ivan, for the great answer. Actually, that covers very important issues. And yeah, I would also like to reflect a bit on this size issue, because I think it's very important. Because actually, I think our research, a kind of action and actor-based research that can go a bit beyond the classic social network analysis, demonstrate that transnationalization is not only about networking, but actually it's kind of a political dimension in which actors still act in certain ways and get something that they cannot get, for example, in the national politics. This is why more and more, this is my observation, but also we can see it in our presentation in general, the smaller parties or smaller actors having more activities in this transnational level. Reconquête, for example, it was in 2022, it was kind of a fourth party in the presidential elections, but now the electoral success, that they do not have an electoral success in the last elections, yet they still invest a lot in this transnational dimension. Or the case of, for example, Militia Christi in Italy, which is a conservative Catholic group that is actually a small social and political movement. Yet when we observe their actually interactions, we can see that they have also been invested a lot to the transnational networks, transnational activities, which shows that it actually, and in our discussions with the members of this group, it demonstrated that this is a strategic choice to actually legitimize their position in the eyes of their audience, but also in the eyes of the other actors that can also provide some support to them in their activities. So this approach that we are, and also in other several research, we can see that this approach that transform transnationalization into a policy field in the kind of a field that in which different actors try to get what they want in a legitimate way is I think is a nice way to understand the complex dynamics of these, how a small party can get more than a big party. Actually, it's very I think an interesting and complex political reality. And yeah, regarding the actually woke issue, as Zsolt also mentioned, that it fascinates me because, as you said, in Hungary or in other countries, it is not a very actually grounded or resonating issue normally. Yet we observe a very strong commitment to fight against wokeism. And as I said, in CPAC, actually, you enter through a gate that says woke free zone, which is a very insane thing to me. Actually, it's very interesting, and it shows the impact of globalization, as you said. And also, I think that it shows us, to the researchers, that the issue of diffusion is also important to understand this transnationalization. Yes, we focus mostly on very similar cases, similar countries, but we need to go beyond the transnationalization, and also we need to understand these processes of diffusion that can be tracked in the case of wokeism from US to the Europe, actually, which is a very interesting case, I think. So we need to focus a bit more on the spread of ideas and beliefs and frames that maybe cannot directly understood by the direct connections and direct networks among the transnational among the illiberal actors, but through a bit more focus on the social network, social media platforms, and the non-relational ways of spread of ideas. So I believe that it shows that this case of wokeism shows a very good potential to understand these dimensions of transnationalization of illiberalism as well, that are beyond the networked interactions of the actors in this universe. And yeah, regarding the money issue, it's also very interesting. And when we look at this, as you mentioned, that there's always these debates about where the money is coming from. And in our cases, actually, for example, in the cases of FPO, we have observed the Ibiza affairs in 2019, if I'm not wrong, about the Russian influence on FPO's activities, etc. So this is also another dimension that should be further investigated in the future research to understand actually these financial dimension of transnationalization, because it definitely shapes these whole interactions at some point. So tracking these donors is significant to understand these dynamics. So for now, I think I am okay. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would then move on to questions from our audience and might piggyback on some of them with my questions to you. But I will, if you allow me, read them out because they are fairly complex and I wouldn't want to lose part of the message and not do justice to it. So we have a question that already touches on some of the issues that we started discussing, but I think it is very interesting to actually tease out where the various frames come from. And the question goes, how much of the temporal dimension of changes in illiberal framings, like wokeism, transgenderism, social policy, can be simply explained by reaction to accelerating social liberalism in the US? And here it resonates with the idea of globalization. So trans became a mainstream issue only in the mid-2010s. Wokeism grew during the late 2010s, and then with the Black Lives Matter phenomenon in the early 2020s. Is it mostly intra-European transnational networking or an over-determined reaction to major ideological change occurring within the hegemon? So I think although our research really focuses primarily on European actors, but already you have been alluding to non-European ones, American ones, CPAC itself, the Heritage Foundation. So do European illiberals react to the United States and what goes on there? Or do we also see some homegrown issues? What do you think? What is the main trend that we can observe? And the piggybacking here, do we see anything, if you are familiar with that topic, that is picked up in the United States by American illiberal actors from European frames and European discourses, if we can identify any specifically European frames? Shall I throw more questions at you, or would you like to rather just react first?
Maybe we react first. It's a long one.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, both are interesting questions. I have a lot of thoughts on this. I would say that the gender ideology frame is more of a European, but also South American frame that came from the Vatican. So in this sense, this is the biggest Catholic export. But wokeism, on the other hand, is more of a US frame. And I think it's because it serves as this kind of floating signifier or bridging frame, has a frame bridging function. It connects issues of race, what they criticize as critical race theory, and gender, which in Europe is not the racial issues and tensions, racism, as it is, of course, in the US is not as big of an issue in terms, of course it is an issue, it's a big issue, but not as politicized by the leading actors. So this is what wokeism does, I think, as a concept. It's perfect for uniting various issues and actors. And I think this is why CPAC, which is originally comes from the American Conservative Union, frames things as wokeism. But we should not forget that in Europe, of course, resistance to quote unquote gender ideology is a very local grassroots resistance to progressive LGBT policies, gender equality policies in various countries. So trans rights, LGBT rights are a very important political issue in every country, I would say, even in Eastern European countries, especially This was something I was working on in my PhD, because they had to join the EU quickly and adopt liberal policies. So it became very politicized because overnight liberal progressive laws were introduced. Then I would stop here maybe.
Anyone else would like to jump in?
Sorry, just briefly add something to what Ivan says. So, especially about wokeism, it's a very interesting case, as I said. Now, actually, we also want to conduct a research about its diffusion, because when you check it, you can see at first it was the UK that was kind of influenced by these anti-woke stance, and everything actually happens in the last 5-10 years. It's very new, yet very, very fast process that resonated a lot with different actors. And this is the interesting and important part about wokeism debate, as Ivan mentioned, because it's a kind of master frame that can bring different actors together, that resonate with different kind of actors easily. And one of the important, and I think, again, interesting issue is that, especially in France, for example, it's kind of a part of a big public debate in which intellectuals from different groups are so involved. It's not only about illiberal or radical actors, whatever you call, but it's a kind of a public issue that was discussed by many intellectuals, by conservative intellectuals or far-right intellectuals as well. But it is mostly about how actually it's a kind of foreign ideology imported from the US that is a threat to the French culture, basically. And this is how it kind of finds itself a legitimate ground in the public debates, I guess. So, and in other countries, in Hungary, it's easily politicized. It was already resonated a lot with Fidesz and its audience. So it's, I think, very, very significant to see this pattern, this pathway, to understand also which issues can also have a similar processes in this transnationalization, dynamics. So yeah, we hope to actually check that as well, and also vice versa, which is, I think, very interesting question that we haven't done something about, but it would be also very, very good to see if US also adopted or US illiberal actors actively adopted some tactics or some repertoire, some frames from the European ones. Great question to be further investigated.
Always happy to pose questions that will require further research, and hopefully we can get funding for it. Let me group together now a couple questions that concern specifically the methodology and some of the findings that our audience have picked up on. And then I would still move on more towards implications a little bit to round out our session. So some of the methodological questions. One question probably requires a short answer. Can you clarify how you categorize posts that deal with sex education? Is it clustered in the gender or education category, or both? So it's a very technical question. Secondly, can you also trace frame alignment processes? Namely, is there the possibility to trace when certain actors started using similar frames? And then a third question I would group here is regarding the activity, the intensity of the activity of certain actors. You found that some are very active transnationally, others not. Do you know why? And what would you say, what is driving this transnational activity? And here I would bring in a contextual question. So we know that you looked at Facebook and the Twitter/X data. And we also know that the extent to which political actors use such platforms really varies across Europe. To what extent does this play into your research? How can we account for this? And also, to what extent does social network analysis give us a close enough picture of what is going on. To what extent are the actors really interested to share their activity on social media? These are partly methodological, partly contextual questions, and then we would move more to policy.
Maybe I would give to Batuhan the one about sex education, because I mean it's the content analysis.
Yeah. It was one of the, actually in this kind of cases we use additional methods like key topic analysis to find that key modeling, to find and also analyze the qualitatively the data that we have to see actually where it fits better, because if it's in the more kind of a debate that is used especially in education related issues, then we aim to actually put that category, put that frame under the education category. But it was one of the issues that we also had some hard time to define actually where to definitely put. So we use qualitative. We as I said, we analyze qualitatively the data that we have to see under which category it fits better. So this was our major approach in frames like this, because it was not the only one that we had some hard time to actually detect if it's social policy or education, or for example gender related issues. Again, like the frames like family and marriage related ones, it fits well to gender, but also there was a kind of a social policy related dimension for it. So for that ones, actually we did manually checks to see, and then we decided actually under which category it would be better to fit them. So this was our major approach, if I understood the question right. So
yeah, I would like to jump in on Dominica's question on why some actors are, which is the $1,000,000 question, why some actors are very active transnationally and others not. And here it's just my educated guess based on the Facebook data, thinking about the most prominent actors, for example. I would say that we have very established radical right parties that are used by smaller radical right parties in other countries as a source of legitimation, which has been also researched in existing studies, where you can see that if you can, align yourself with Le Pen, you have instances, for example, in Czech Republic with Tomio Okamura from SPD, consistently posting online these posters where he's kind of cut-pasted next to Marine Le Pen, which is a typical example. So you're trying to gather legitimacy, if you don't have it at home, by tying yourself to influential actors abroad. So for smaller radical right parties that are especially in a crowded radical right field with other contenders, this is important. I also think that this dynamic between the European political groups fosters this kind of competition, fosters increasing transnational activity, because if you have, and this relates also to, I'm sorry, Zuzana, that I'm now kind of jumping across the question, Balin's question, so which is a very important question. It's connected to the competition and conflict around issues such as the war in Ukraine. So the differences between PiS and Konfederacja in Poland, which are of course connected to differences between the ECR group and Patriots for Europe group, or now I cannot cover all of them in my head. Also the Europe of Sovereign Nations group. Similarly, our homeland, which has a very different stance compared to Fidesz in Hungary. So these kinds of things are important, because newer radical right parties like our homeland try to differentiate themselves from, in this case, Fidesz, by taking a different stance on international issues like war in Ukraine or the war in Palestine. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Maybe
Maybe,
sorry, I can just add something for the last question that I saw now. Can I?
Last question in the Q&A.
Yes.
Let me just pick it up for you first.
Okay,
so
perfect.
our audience who might be following things later on YouTube also
sorry.
knows what the question
I just
is
realized
about.
the existence of Q&A session that I can see the questions. Sorry for that. I was excited.
Indeed. Unfortunately, we cannot transfer that to
Yes.
the video recording. So just so it's picked up, and also the question that Ivan reacted to was a question about differences between the various radical right actors and how, for example, impactful events like the war differentiates them, divides them, and how they also differentiating each other. Themselves from each other. The question that Batuan would like to jump in on deals with, it's indeed very fascinating, that we see that far-right groups and parties consistently promote the idea of sovereignty around the world. Why is it so that actually they are often institutions that are heavily invested in fostering international cooperations that take this ideological stance, such as MCC, Matthias Corvinus College, the Center for Fundamental Rights, Machiavelli Institute, Danube Institute, and so on and so forth. It's also interesting because Russia does not focus on this so much, but far-right groups in the US, Hungary, and others do. So we see a differentiation here as well, and something that may appear as a paradox. So, Batuhan, the floor is yours to explain it.
Yeah, just briefly, I would like to reflect on it. Then Ivan probably would like to add something. But yeah, it's kind of a paradox. It seems like a paradox actually. But when we look at the last 10 years of especially the Eurosceptic parties that transform into illiberal actors now, or the radical right, as I said, whatever you call, we observe a pattern that their Euroscepticism or European Union rejection transformed into an idea of changing European Union into the way they would like to behave. So this is one of the patterns that we observe. So instead of rejecting it, now it's better to change it together, change the institution together, change the other forms of supranational elements or other institutions all together as allies. So yes, sovereignty and nativism is still the important elements of their political rhetoric, political activities. Yet there is this new idea of not maybe new, but in the last years we observed that there is this idea of, okay, let's come together, and instead of just leaving it to elites, just change the whole system altogether so we can behave in the way we want. And it's kind of interesting to see that actually. And relating to this point, one of the issues that we also observe, for example, in the case of FPÖ, is that it was from one of the expert interviews that we conducted about the case of FPÖ, because FPÖ is very active transnationally, but actually it doesn't talk a lot about this transnational presence in its local and national political rhetoric, political discourses. It doesn't actually, as far as we observe, it doesn't want to be considered as a kind of very transnationally active or a party that is beyond the Austrian politics, but it presents a very local, a very nativist understanding of doing politics. Yet it's engaged in many activities, as we discussed actually, the various forms of activities to increase its transnational influence. So this also kind of, I think, reflects this interesting paradox, but I think that it's very strategic and pragmatic approach to increase the influence on transnational political dimension, in which the other institutions such as European Union were considered as a threat to be tamed. So instead of destroying it, now it's better to change it, is kind of the new strategy of these nativist actors. So Ivan, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I mean, you covered more or less everything, I think. Maybe what I would add is that this, I mean, from also basing from some of the other research that we have been doing with more in depth with these actors, I think that what the imaginary is from their perspective, by them, I mean, especially smaller radical right parties, sovereignist parties that use this frame, is this typical ethno-pluralist imaginary of a world divided in nation states that live in harmony and that are basically ethnically and racially homogeneous, but that then cooperate in some kind of confederalist structures of cooperation. And here what we also find is this kind of maybe alter Europeanization, where the Visegrad Four is the most famous example, right? Where you have intensive cooperation between sovereignist actors and nationalist actors to basically cooperate and create a kind of counter block to what they consider the Brussels liberal elites. And historically, this is not, of course, new also in this sense that there is such a transnational cooperation of nationalists. In the Russian case, of course, Russia has been historically very much interested in cooperation, especially the Orthodox right and the American Christian right that initiated the World Congress of Families, for example. But now with the war, this has changed, and Russia is very much isolated to some extent, and these dynamics are different. So yeah, maybe I think that that's it from me for now.
Thank you very much, Batuhan and Ivan. Unfortunately, we are approaching the end of our time. So before we conclude, I still would like to give the floor back to Zsolt for any reflection. If you would like to comment on anything that has been said, we still have a question. I'm afraid that might not get a complete answer, but if you would want to maybe reflect on how influential you consider this whole networking to be on public opinion, on policies, just do not leave the question unposed. But as I said, we are unfortunately running low on time.
Thank you. First, just a minor comment. While I was listening to you, I went to the webpage of the Machiavelli Center because I became interested, and I saw that they are partners with the Ökonomus Foundation, which is a Hungarian foundation, and I went to the website of the foundation and I found it's a very interesting foundation that is mainly about geopolitics and sport. And knowing somewhat about the Hungarian regime, it makes sense, but it still looks somewhat strange. Concerning the overall take, and a little bit also reflecting on the question how important these organizations and initiatives are, I think that on the one hand, it's always difficult for nationalists to cooperate. So on average, maybe there is maybe less cooperation among them than it is among socialists or liberals or many other groups. On the other hand, you see that even though they even call themselves nationalists and they use the word sovereignist or sovereignty a lot, there is a genuine cooperation there, even at the level of countries, like when they are in power, there are good relations among the countries. Instead of going at war with each other, they actually cooperate, and very much so at the level of movements and organizations. And their influence very much depends on where we direct our attention. Take the United States. The movement is led by someone who is not interested in ideas and ideologies, but the vice president is someone who is very much interested, and he is very well embedded in these organizations. And those intellectuals who are active in this think tank directly influence some of the decisions, as one can see in case of Project 2025 and many other cases. So yes, maybe they are not mass movements, there are not thousands of people at their events, but their influence can be nevertheless be significant.
And we will try to monitor that influence in the remaining time. We have AUTHLIB running, but not today. I would like to thank all of you who joined us for this debate. I would like to thank the panelists, Ivan, Batuhan, Joad, for sharing your expertise with us. I think it has been a fascinating discussion, and I'm really looking forward to putting out all these findings, results also via our channels. So I would like to encourage our audience to follow us on social media. We are present on Facebook, on Blue Sky, on LinkedIn, and on X. We also have a website and a newsletter. You can find us at AUTHLIB, that is authoritarianism, liberalism, outlib.eu. And if you sign up for our mailing list, you will not miss out on any of our events. We are advertising them via mailing list. So please follow us and stay tuned for more fascinating research coming out from the project. Once again, thank you very much. Have a nice evening and have a nice day ahead.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thank you.